Lerato Sengadi says in 2016 she entered into a customary marriage with the late rapper, whose real name is Jabulani Tsambo. But the Tsambo family says the couple was never married. Proceedings are underway. Let's take you live now to the South Gauteng High Court, where our reporter Slindelo Masikane is standing by. Slindelo, we were live in court just a few minutes ago, in fact, to try and see the court proceedings as they were about to unfold. We then saw the judge getting up and walking out of court. Just take us through what's unfolded in what was really just a short sitting.
Yes, certainly. So the judge did walk into the room with the intention of starting the urgent court application, but he was then asking the legal counsel what was happening exactly with regards to the replying affidavit. So we now know that the legal representatives for the Tsambo family have filed the responding affidavit, and according to Lerato Sengadi's lawyers, they only filed that responding affidavit at around 10 a.m. this morning, so they haven't had enough time to reply to that responding affidavit. So the judge had no choice but to postpone proceedings up until around 1 o'clock this afternoon, and that is when we expect that replying affidavit to have been filed. Now, what we know from the responding affidavit, Michelle, is that the Tsambo family is saying that the Lobola negotiations for Lerato Sengadi were not concluded, and that is why they don't view her as the legal customary wife of Jabba. So they're saying that there needed to be a handing over ceremony, which is a critical event that needs to take place before Lerato could have been pronounced as his legal customary wife. They're also bringing up the issue around the payment of the Lobola negotiations. Now, earlier on, I did read from the founding affidavit that Lerato says that there was an amount of around 45,000 rand agreed upon as the dowry for her on that very day, on the 28th of February 2016, when those negotiations took place. Jabba proceeded on that very day to deposit around 35,000 rand according to Lerato's founding affidavit. But in the responding affidavit, the Tsambo family is saying that only an amount of 30,000 rand was deposited, and so there needed to be more meetings in order to pay the remainder, which was around 15,000 rand, if we're going to take the version of the responding affidavit. So that is why we now have a stall in these proceedings. So we're just waiting for that replying affidavit from Sengadi's lawyers to be submitted to the judge.
So, Slindelo, what it sounds like on the face of what you're saying is that the judge here needs to make some serious decisions, particularly around various issues regarding customary marriages and whether they are in fact valid.
The issue around customary marriages is one that South Africa recognizes. There is an act, there is law around customary marriages. Home Affairs, in fact, South Africa as a country does recognize marriages that take place in a customary manner, in a traditional manner, where two individuals choose to do a traditional ceremony rather than enter into a civil marriage. Now, what we know is that the law says that it doesn't really matter if you haven't registered that customary marriage with Home Affairs. What matters is that the Lobola negotiations need to be complete, and that is what the judge is going to have to decide today, is whether, based on the evidence brought by Lerato Sengadi, whether Lobola negotiations were in fact complete, or on the version of the Tsambo family that Lobola negotiations weren't complete, and that she has actually no right to his body, to his belongings, or to the matrimonial home, which Lerato Sengadi also cites as having been taken from her, or being barred from that home, and also not being included in funeral arrangements for her husband. So that is the decision the judge is going to have to make today. And as you can hear from the responding affidavit, that the Tsambo family is saying that there needed to be a handover event of Lerato from her family to the Tsambo family, and that particular event didn't take place. And not only that, but they're also claiming that the dowry amount was not complete.
All right, so thanks very much for giving us some clarity around those issues. Lindela Masikana is our reporter tracking that story from the South Gauteng High Court for us. At 1 o'clock, that's when court is set to resume. Let's continue our discussion now around traditional marriages in South Africa. We're joined by customary law expert Zama Mopai. Zama, thanks very much for your time on the channel. As you've just heard, so there is this postponement now until 1 o'clock. Of course, the issue at play here is not a question around whether customary marriages are in fact valid, but the issues that are really unique to the case between the late WHP and his wife, Lerato, who is in court at the moment. Just take us through your understanding around this handover ceremony having not happened between Lerato's family and WHP's family, and the payment of lobola not being complete. What's your understanding?
Thank you, Michelle. First, like the reporter said, that in South Africa now, customary marriages are recognized. Actually, we count from the year 2000. But what is also important to note is that the Act does say that the marriage, the customary marriage, must be negotiated and entered into or celebrated according to customary law. Now, because lobolo is not actually specifically mentioned there, that is where it comes into the Act. And if you look into the wording of that particular subsection, is that two things that must happen. Number one is that there must be negotiation. And this is where lobolo comes in, because lobolo is a process of negotiation. And then furthermore, then there must be an entrance or a celebration of that marriage according to customary law. So from what I hear from this particular story is the negotiation part has taken place, which is the giving of lobolo, meaning that the families had met together and they did negotiate on what would be the appropriate amount for lobolo. However, we now need to look into whether the second part has been done, which is the entrance into the marriage according to customary law. And that is where the handing over or the receiving of the bride comes in. Now, this is very important because you would be aware that customary marriages compared to civil marriages, it's a process. It's not a transaction that can happen in one day, although many people can afford to do that now. But it is a process. So lobolo alone does not constitute a valid customary marriage, but also that the bride must have been transferred, or there must have been that agreement between the families that at this point, even if lobolo has not been fully paid, which is not usually the case. Sometimes lobolo may not be paid. What is sufficient with lobolo is the agreement of the payment of lobolo and a giving of lobolo, even partially. But then after that has been done, it is very important that the families must agree that from this point henceforth, the two are given into marriage to each other, meaning that the family of the bride must accept that she is now the wife to her husband, and the husband's family, or the prospective husband's family in this case, must receive her and acknowledge her according to the customs that they need to perform, which would now say she has been incorporated into the family and consequently the wife. Now, according to the RCMA, which the Recognition of Customary Marriages Act, if the latter has not happened, which is the transfer, or at least an agreement about the transfer, then the customary marriage is not fully entered into. So I think that is where the court needs to determine, given the facts that will be presented, whether what happened after the lobola negotiations, was there at least an agreement of transfer or anything to that effect. Then we can establish whether the marriage was valid or not. Until then, one could say it still stands perhaps as an engagement, but we are not sure whether that would be a fully valid customary marriage.
So Zama, for you, are there lessons in what's unfolding here for couples who often go through the stages of negotiations, but perhaps they don't follow through and the actual ceremony doesn't happen, but you continue to live together, you continue to build a life together as a married couple, but when it comes to a case in law, that you might not have all of the benefits that come with marriage?
Yes, very, very, very valuable lessons. And well, the lesson being that if you're going to go for a customary marriage, you must make sure that everything that needs to be done must be done. And that does not mean that, we can relax or people can relax their customs by a simple agreement that the families have agreed that we are handing over pending other things. For example, with other cultures, they would slaughter an animal, others it would be umembe, so others it will simply be a big celebration. And by the way, I need to mention that a celebration is not in itself a prerequisite, but it can also serve as a proof. But what is important is that everybody must be clear at which point did the families agree that they are handing over, that is the bride's family, handing over the bride, and the groom's family to receive or to acknowledge, incorporate the bride as their own, as the wife. Now, the lessons that we're talking about are very important because we meet this at oftentimes that people think just the giving of lobolo, it's enough. It is not. Legally, it is not. According to customary law, living customary law, in fact, both, even official customary law, giving of lobolo is not enough. It is but just one of the requirements towards concluding a customary marriage. So it is very important that people that enter into a customary marriage must ensure that there has been a transfer and the incorporation of the bride into the groom's family.
Right. Well, thanks very much for that clarity. Zama Mopai is a customary law expert, just giving us some clarity on the issues that are unfolding in the South Gauteng High Court. WHP's partner, Lerato Sengadi, embroiled in this bitter spat with his family, who refused to accept her as WHP's wife.